The mud is warm. Not warm like a bath. Warm like something rotting underneath it. 2500 BC, the banks of the Nile, and the air tastes like wet clay and dead reeds. You're a fisherman. You've done this 1,000 times. Wade in, feel around with your feet and hands for the shape of dinner, drag it out, go home. Simple. Except this time, your fingers brush something slick and wrong. And before your brain can even register fish, your whole arm goes dead. Not asleep. Dead. Your jaw locks. Your heart stutters somewhere up near your throat. And you're standing there, waist deep in a river, absolutely certain that something underneath the water just tried to kill your soul.
No power grid. No copper wire humming in a wall somewhere. No little battery icon telling you how much juice you've got left. Just a terrified guy in a river and an invisible force that feels genuinely like a god reaching up through the mud to grab you. This is the actual story of how humans found electricity. It doesn't start in a lab. It doesn't start with a kite. It starts with people getting violently zapped by swamp monsters, strapping live animals to their skulls as medicine, and maybe rigging temple statues with hidden batteries to fake miracles. Messy, painful, deeply, deeply weird.
Everyone's got the same story stuck in their head. Electricity is a modern thing. It started when some 1700s guy in a wig figured out how to push a current through metal. That's the textbook version, and it's not even close to true. The itch to understand this invisible force is way older than the word for it, and what people did with it, centuries before anyone had wired so much as a doorbell, is the part they leave out. So what actually happened down there in the mud? Who figured out how to weaponize it? Who got erased from the story? And why does any of this matter to you, sitting there right now with a glowing rectangle in your hand that runs on the exact same force? We have to start with the Egyptians, because they saw it first and they wrote it down. On tomb walls along the Nile, you find carvings of a specific, ugly, heavy-bodied fish, Malopterus electricus, the electric catfish. They didn't have a word for volts. They called it the Thunderer. Fishermen noticed a pattern. Hook one of these things, and the shock traveling up a wet line was enough to make a grown man drop his entire catch and stumble backward like he'd been hit. The fish wasn't doing anything mystical. It was running a defense system built out of modified muscle tissue, basically a biological taser sewn into its own body.
But try telling that to a guy standing in ankle-deep water 3,000 years before the word biology existed. To him, that fish was carrying a piece of the sky. And here's the thing about people. We don't run from weird pain. Not for long. We poke it, we study it, we ask how we can use it against something else. Let that sit for a second. This next part gets worse before it gets useful. Fast forward to Rome. Scribonius Largus, personal physician to Emperor Claudius, is treating patients with crushing migraines, and his actual written prescription, not folklore, not a legend, an honest-to-God medical text called Compositiones, is this. Catch a live black torpedo ray. Flat, ocean-dwelling, capable of putting out close to 200 volts. Walk out onto a wet beach, press the living, thrashing fish directly against your forehead. Hold it there, wait for your entire face to go numb. Money, pride, paranoia. That's usually what drives bad medicine. But this one actually worked. Not because Largus understood a single thing about neurons. It worked because 200 volts of raw bioelectricity will short-circuit a human pain signal faster than anything in the Roman medicine cabinet. 2,000 years before psychiatric wards started using electroshock therapy on purpose, Roman citizens were standing on beaches with an angry ocean predator strapped to their skulls, getting their nervous system rebooted to cure a headache, which is completely wild. Then there's 1936, digging near Baghdad, and this is where the story stops being quaint and starts being unsettling. Workers pull a small clay jar out of the ground. Inside it, a copper cylinder, and inside that, an iron rod. Harmless looking, except when modern researchers rebuilt the setup and poured in an acidic liquid, vinegar, fermented grape juice, something with a low pH, the jar generated roughly 1 volt of electricity. on its own. Sitting in the dirt, this thing is now known as the Baghdad Battery, and it's over 2,000 years old.
Some historians shrug it off, say it was just a fancy container for sacred scrolls, nothing more. Fine, but others point to something darker, and honestly more plausible given what we know about how ancient temples operated. Priests in this era were in the business of manufacturing awe. If you wire a handful of these jars together and run the current under a bronze statue of a god, anyone who reaches out to touch it gets a sudden, invisible, painful jolt. To a peasant standing there in 15 BC, that's not a chemical reaction between copper and acid. That's the literal hand of a deity striking through solid metal, punishing them for daring to touch it. Electrical engineering's first real-world application wasn't lighting a room. It was a parlor trick built to terrify people into paying their temple taxes on time. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and it's going to sound like a stretch until it isn't. Electric eels and torpedo rays don't just blast prey with one big hit and call it a day. They send out tiny, low-voltage pulses first, quiet pings that map the water around them, reading the faint electrical signature of anything hiding nearby. Then, once they've located the target, they overload it with one massive spike.
That's not just a fish thing. That's the exact same architecture running underneath every predictive algorithm on your phone right now. Low-cost pings that map your behavior, quietly in the background. What you paused on, what you scrolled past, what you lingered over for half a second too long. Followed by one precisely timed spike designed to grab you and not let go. Ancient fishermen picked up on the eel version of this without any of the math. They watched which patches of river other animals avoided instinctively, and they learned to read those patterns as a kind of primitive radar, mapping invisible danger zones using nothing but observation. We didn't invent that kind of pattern reading. We just built a faster, quieter version of it and put it in your pocket.
Here's the part of this story that actually stings, though, and it's not the fish. We build statues to Franklin, to Volta, to Edison, patent after patent, name after name, stamped into history books like they conjured this force out of nothing. Lone geniuses, fire from the heavens, that whole myth. But somewhere in a cold sea 2,000 years ago, there was a Roman slave who had to wade out into open water and grab a torpedo ray with his bare hands, risking a shock that could drop him to his knees, so his wealthy master could get relief from gout. That man did the actual dangerous hands-on discovery work. He figured out, through pain, through trial, through nobody caring if he lived or died doing it, exactly how this invisible force interacted with human flesh. And his name is gone. Not lost, never recorded in the first place. The people who did the dirty, dangerous groundwork got wiped from the story before it was even finished being written, while the people who eventually formalized it on paper got the statues.
Same discovery, completely different fate, decided entirely by who was standing close enough to power to have their name written down. So next time you plug your phone into the wall, or you feel it buzz once against your leg, go back to that riverbank. Go back to a Roman doctor pressing a furious, slick animal against a man's skull to cure a headache. You are running your entire life on a force that people spent thousands of years fearing, worshipping, and quietly weaponizing to fake miracles, centuries before anyone figured out how to make it flip on a light. That's not a clean line of progress marching toward a light bulb. That's just our species, over and over again, sticking a hand into something dangerous until eventually, painfully, it started working for us. So here's the real question. If you were standing on that beach, in Rome, ray in hand, no idea if it was medicine or a death sentence, would you have volunteered to test it on yourself first? Tell me in the comments. I actually want to know.